That's Paul McCartney. I want my book back. I'm not taking calls while I'm filming. Oh, all right. Okay. Well, that's different. I've been working out. I've been burning the midnight oil. You know, scripts all over the hotel room, cigarette ashes and coffee. I don't even smoke.
It's Friday night, and I just got paid. Going out on the town, trying to get my freak on. I can't see me staying home all alone. Gotta go out to see if I can find a special one. Yeah. You and me and you, back until the break of dawn.
I'm not trying to be a solo artist. That's first and foremost. I'm just a Bee Gee on my own at the moment, you know, and that's how I see myself.
Me and you, yeah, yeah. Popping crystal, yeah.
It's not different than doing a song on stage on my own with the Bee Gees. It's not different at all. And if you look at all the other groups like the Beatles and Fleetwood Mac, and they'll do stuff on their own on stage, even though they're still with the group. So even when you're doing stuff on your own, it doesn't feel like different. We don't always sit together when we're doing interviews, for instance. So it's not like I'm feeling different. And me and Barry will be together again, and we'll be working together. So it's just really, to me, it's no different. I don't see myself as a solo artist. I just see myself as Robin Gibb, a Bee Gee, doing stuff on my own. A summary, we've got 100,000 people tonight just for rehearsal.
Wow.
Because they only want to let a few people in tonight. Because they thought we don't want to give too much away, just 100,000, keep it small, keep it tiny, you know, and that way if we screw up, it won't be a lot of people to worry about, yeah. Because tomorrow night we've got 500,000 people.
That's the last one. Thank you very much for your kindness coming over.
I always get butterflies before I go on stage. I think every performer does. It's not so bad when you're on. It's actually the waiting and that moment before going on. Here we go. I can actually remember the three of us shared a bed, and that's how poor we were. Believe it or not, the three of us shared a bed, and we had one room. And we used to sit in this bed every night when we were kids and dream about being successful and famous, but not from money, just for being, because we didn't relate to the money side because we were too young, but it was always like, you know, we'd talk about what we were going to do. And believe it or not, we'd always talk about what we were going to do as if we were going to do. We weren't big-headed or conceited or anything because we had nothing. And there was nothing out there to indicate that we were going to do anything, because my dad didn't have two pennies to rub together, you know, and he was doing all kinds of odd jobs, but, you know, even that wasn't making enough money. So, you know, we were actually in a situation where, you know, we could dream, but, you know, there was nothing really to indicate that dream would come true, but we used to talk about it every night. So in a sense, the dream was there, and we used to talk about everything we were going to do. And I think, you know, maybe because when you're kids, you don't see the obstacles. And maybe that's a good thing. I think on all of us, for myself, Barry and Maurice, our biggest influences was the Beatles, because they were a rock group doing their own harmonies. They're huge all over the world. They were having an effect on everybody. They were writing their own songs. And this was very instrumental to what we were going to do in our lives, you know, in writing and recording. And it was kind of like a role thing, because we were much younger than them. And it was like a guiding light. Well, this is the way to go. Of course, there were other influences, like what was going on in the States at the time, or the black influences from Otis Redding, the Stax thing, Atlantic Records, and Motown. Well, a lot of these influences mixed in with what the folk culture was doing at the time, which is what was also influencing the Beatles.
So what songs are you going to sing tonight?
Star Spangled Banner, God Bless America, and Putting on My Top Hat. We started singing very young out of love for music, but not because, you know, we were going professional, or we didn't have Osmond type upbringings, you know, where we had coaches and people teaching us and things like that. It was just a real sort of we came from a very poor background, and we were just having fun. You know, even our parents didn't understand what we were doing. So it wasn't really, we didn't even know what we were doing. We were just doing because we liked it, making music. We didn't really start really becoming professional or starting getting serious about it until we got into our mid-teens, because it's very difficult, you know, to be a kid act. We were never really a kid act. We were just kids playing around with music, which is where we really got our background. Maybe because we started getting interested early, helped us later. But we were never really a professional kid act like the Osmonds were and things like that as an early group. It was just to us, it was just a hobby. I didn't develop my voice at all growing up. I just sang because I like singing. And like all singers, when they start very young, and I was reading about Dusty Springfield's biography the other day, she was doing the same thing. She was finding disused sewage pipes and bathrooms with echoes in them, you know, singing in them, because people like singing very young, like to hear their voices in echo. And your friends think you're weird, but you know, you tend to do these things on your own, by the way. And I kind of loved, you know, and Barry was the same. We tend to go around looking for big places with echo in them and then singing them, you know, even without instruments, just singing, you hear the voice, angelic, and it gives a whole different dimension. And only people who really like singing really can appreciate this. And it's not uncommon with people who are singers, that they do this as kids. And I just liked the way I sounded, and I just didn't think, oh, I can sing and I've got a great voice, or I've got a lousy voice, or anything. I didn't have any view of my voice. I just enjoyed it. The great thing about being in Australia was it was a great school of learning for us, and we hold that very precious as part of our lives. We wouldn't want it any different. We spent time in Brisbane, and we lived in Sydney, and the great experiences that we learned from people like Australian artists like Carl Joy and Johnny O'Keefe, and managers like Kevin Jacobson were very instrumental in bringing the Bee Gees to the front in Australia before we left. But we went as far as we could there as kids, because we were still quite young. But those were very important days for us, and which I don't think we could have achieved anything in our lives without that time in Australia. The most important thing about writing songs and how you write them is, particularly in the case of the Bee Gees, is that we sit around a table with a memo recorder and a tape recorder running, and we'd have a guitar or keyboard in place. The melody is the first thing that comes. The melody is the most important part of the songwriting process. That comes first, and then lyrics will apply to that afterwards, which we all write. Writing songs is a bit like playing Scrabble. You know, you're always hearing titles. You know, it's like if you play Scrabble, you're always seeing 7-letter words everywhere. You know, let's go Scrabble. It's the same with writing songs. You know, when you're in that psyche, you're actually, when people say a statement, you know, you can think, well, hang on, that's a title. You know, they may not know, but you're a songwriter, so you hear titles and you hear lines, or you hear. So I hear songs in terms of, and Barry does the same thing. In terms, you get a title, it's a statement. That statement is the basis for the whole song. So it's not so much as what is the song about. The statement of the song will create that. Passionate love songs are still very much a part of the fabric of popular music, and they're always part of what are the biggest songs. My Heart Will Go On, and I Will Always Love You, and some of the biggest records of all time tend to sing about relationships. And I don't think that's ever going to change. And people always say, well, you know, isn't it a bit corny to sing about love songs? Well, the biggest songs of today are still love songs. It doesn't change. And whoever keeps saying it does is not looking at the charts and is not watching, because that'll never happen. It's perennial, because young and old will always relate to relationships. Relationships gone wrong, missing people, torch songs, always huge. And that's part of human nature, and that will never change. I thought I'd do a little Irving Berlin routine, but then I changed my mind. I said, no, I'll stick to the Bee Gees songs. How Deep Is Your Love was written in a period of time of 3 weeks where we were stuck in the French countryside in Ereville in March, and it was pretty chilly. And we remember mixing Staying Alive at 5 o'clock in the morning. We had the shutters open, the 16th century shutters, watching these cows roaming around the fields with their udders full of milk, ready to be relieved of their load. And Staying Alive, the mix of Staying Alive was wafting over the meadows, and there was only just cows and sheep and the smell of pig dung, and very powerful mix, as you can tell.
apart from the mix of Staying Alive itself. And that was, I mean, I think the cows of Eryville and the countryside of France were the first to hear Staying Alive in its rawest form. And of course, you get the impression that a lot of people think a lot of these songs from Fever were written in the bowels of New York nightclubs and stuff. But no, right in the middle of the French countryside. Staying Alive, If I Can't Have You, More Than a Woman, Night Fever, and all the songs of Fever were written in that 3-week period, even before we knew that Fever was being made.
Oh yeah, Fanny was our housekeeper in Florida while we were recording the main course album, in which Fanny Be Tender was on that album, and that's the name that inspired that track. Of course, Fanny Be Tender With My Love.
Oh yeah, Words goes much earlier, 10 years before then. And that was actually originally written for an English artist called Cliff Richard. And we wrote that at Portland Place, next door to the BBC. Next door to the Chinese embassy, actually. As we were writing it, we used to hear secret messages going from the Chinese embassy to China. And it used to come across the speakers, and we used to have to stop recording while these secret messages went. Because it was in a road where all the embassies were, and these embassies were there in World War II as well. So they maintained the Russian embassies and that. You could hear the secret codes, and it would come across the speakers. I think some of our records today have some secret messages from the Chinese embassy on them.
Now, Jive Talking, that was inspired by a road on the way to Criteria Studios in Florida, because they had tar ridges. They had tar ridges across the bridge, and we were on the way, and it was quite a long bridge. And as we were going over the bridge, it produced a kind of rhythmic sound on the tires. And of course, believe it or not, we had the basis for Jive Talking from the beginning of the bridge to the end. By the time we reached the end of the bridge, we had the basis for Jive Talking. New York Mining Disaster, funnily enough, was written in the basement of Polydor Records when the power all went out. We were stuck down. I don't know why we were in the basement. There was a studio down there, and there was a power outage. And everybody was in black darkness. And the feeling that we had was that this must be what it's like to actually be in a mining disaster. We're shut off from the world in black darkness, not knowing when you're going to be rescued. We couldn't get back upstairs. We were locked in. For all intents and purposes, we were those miners. New York Mining Disaster, of course, was just the title. We didn't really know whether there'd been a mining disaster in New York, and it didn't matter. However, we did find out there had been one in 1939, months later, which is strange, really. It's almost uncanny. Islands in the Stream, which we wrote for Kenny Rogers and Dolly Parton, was a very big record for them, but was not written as a country song. Incidentally, it is now one of the most recorded and played country songs in the history of country music and country radio. And it was never written as a country song, strangely enough. It was written more as a Tamla kind of soul song in a Marvin Gaye type feel. Well, we had Islands in the Stream already, and thought, well, maybe we can turn this into Kenny's kind of feel for Kenny to sing with Dolly. And there's a very fine line, I feel, between country and R&B soul, and so it wasn't difficult to make the transfer.